Welcome to the second video in my series on eating a low inflammation diet. This is where we're talking about the 4 pillars of eating a diet that will reduce chronic inflammation in the body and therefore reduce your risk of disease. Today we're talking about the history of the human diet, what we used to eat, what we eat now, and what wisdom we can learn from our ancestors in order to eat more healthy in the years to come. If you want to make sure that you don't miss out on future videos, be sure to subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified when I upload more. So for 300,000 years, our ancestors ate a diet that naturally helped them reduce inflammation in the body. Those local nuts and seeds, those local fruits and vegetables, and of course animals who ate all the same. Now over all that time, our genetics haven't really changed that much, but over the last 250 years, our diets have changed drastically. Now we eat a lot more sugar, a lot more carbohydrates, a lot more trans fats than we've ever eaten in the history of humanity. And this is causing a lot of changes to our bodies and a lot of changes to our health. In other words, our diets are causing a dysregulation of inflammation in the body. But the good news is we can balance that through a low inflammation diet, ALOW, a diet that includes antioxidants, low glycemic index foods, omega-3 fatty acids, and whole foods. So without further ado, here's a little history of human eating. All right, let's look way back in history for a second at the ancestral diet. What did hunter-gatherer societies eat? 1. In most societies, most of the food was from animals and fish. 2. In all these societies, they ate a really wide variety of plant-based foods, nuts and seeds, leaves and shoots, and fruits. 3, and this is most important, our ancestors were mostly healthier than we were today. They didn't have the kinds of degenerative diseases that modern society does. Now, when it comes to the breakdown of macros in the ancestral diet, of course it's going to vary from society to society, but in general it looked to be about a third, a third, a third. A third protein, a third fat, and a third carbs. Now what's really interesting to notice here is the really high proportion of fat in the ancestral diet. As you guys know, for years now we've heard that fat is the enemy of health and that eating a fatty diet is going to lead to high cholesterol and heart disease. What's interesting is in these ancestral cultures, they ate a very large proportion of their calories from fat, and yet they didn't have the heart disease, they didn't have the respiratory disease, they didn't have diabetes in the same way that we do today. So something else is happening besides simply fat intake. Something else that's interesting about our ancestors' fat intake is the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids in their diet. They tended to eat them in about a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, why is this important? It's because omega-6 fatty acids are actually pro-inflammatory and omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. So in the ancestral diet, the balance of the two meant a balance of inflammation in the body. And you'll see later in this video when we talk about today's diet, we have a much higher proportion of omega-3s in our diet, causing us to have a pro-inflammatory diet. So when it comes to the 4 pillars of a low inflammation diet, our ancestors had high level of antioxidants, very low glycemic index foods, lots of omega-3s in their diet, and of course 100% whole foods. Okay, so what happened next? About 12,500 years ago came the agricultural revolution. So this is where humans figured out how to farm. This is the first time that they were able to plant crops in the ground and tend to those crops instead of moving around to gather food or to hunt food. So to supplement all the foods that were ready to eat in the spring and summer and fall, of course the natural thing that people would want to figure out how to grow is food that could tide them over through the winter. And what would be the natural choice? Grains. They're easy to store over the winter and they're easy to transport for trade as well. So after the agricultural revolution, now people are eating more grains, and grains are heavier in omega-6 fats. Not only are the people eating the grains, but animals are eating the grains as well. So people are eating the omega-6 fats in the grain, and they're also eating animals who've eaten that grain. What this means overall is that during this time in human history, we started to eat a less diverse diet. We started to eat more grains. We started to eat less wild meat and more domesticated meat, again, that have been eating those grains. And so overall, this led to a widespread shift in the diet to become more pro-inflammatory. So looking at the 4 pillars of a low inflammation diet, when it comes to antioxidants, we were eating fewer of them. When it comes to glycemic index, now we're more in a mid-range level. When it comes to omega-3 fatty acids, now they're in a smaller proportion to the omega-6 fatty acids, 5-to-1 ratio at this point in human history. And when it comes to whole foods, about 90% of the diet now is whole foods. The other 10% is some kind of processed foods. So you can see we're starting to make the shift away from the anti-inflammatory diet to a more pro-inflammatory diet. And even though the change in diet might seem small, the effects on human health were big. Today, scientists can actually look at mummies from ancient Egypt during this period of time and can actually see clogged arteries, evidence of heart disease that was happening in this society at this time that didn't happen in the hunter-gatherer societies that preceded them. Then about 250 years ago, we had the next big shift in the way we ate, and that was thanks to the Industrial Revolution. And at this point in time, we started using machines to process our food in a way that we had never done before. For the first time ever, people were able to access refined grains, refined sugars, and separated fats, particularly margarine, that had never been available before, and this had a huge impact on people's health. Across society, we began replacing nutrient-dense whole foods with nutrient-poor refined foods, with disastrous consequences for our health. For the first time across society, we began seeing increases in these degenerative diseases like heart disease, respiratory disease, and cancer. When we compare this diet to our 4 pillars of a low-inflammation diet, antioxidants have decreased even more, the glycemic index has increased even more, the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s is even less. Now, at this point in history, it's about a 10-to-1 ratio. And then whole foods is now down to about 65% of the diet. So that brings us to today, the fast food revolution, where fresh food actually becomes kind of foreign. The first fast food franchises popped up in America in the 1920s, so fast food is about 100 years old now. Today, the average American spends about $1,200 on fast food every year, and our children in America receive about 12% of their calories from fast food. Food refinement and food processing has become rampant, and eating whole, natural foods is almost subversive these days. Whether you're in a fast food restaurant or a dine-in restaurant or even in the grocery store, everywhere you look, refined carbs, refined sugars, trans fats, and it's really hard to get a meal that's just simple, whole food. So that means out of our 300,000-year human existence, where our genetics have pretty much stayed the same, in the last 100 years, we've changed our diet dramatically. When you look at it according to the 4 pillars, ALOW, our antioxidant levels are very low. Our glycemic index of our food is very high. Our ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s is now about 20-to-1. If you remember back in the ancestral diet, it was about 1-to-1. And the percentage of food that we eat that comes from whole sources is now 35%, only about 1/3 of our food. The information in this video comes from Dr. Ron Hunninghake of the Riordan Clinic, and according to him, today's diet is 20 times more pro-inflammatory than our ancestors' diet. But the good news is that there is something we can do about this by paying attention to what we eat today and making choices that are more similar to what our ancestors ate than to what today's fast food society typically eats. We can do this by focusing on the 4 pillars of a low inflammation diet: antioxidants, low glycemic index, omega-3 fatty acids, and whole foods. Now in future videos, I'm going to be going into more depth about each of these 4 pillars. We'll look at each one, we'll tease apart why they're important and how they work within the body, and of course talk about what to eat and what not to eat in order to reduce inflammation. So we learned that on average today, only about 35% of our food comes from whole food sources. And I'm curious, does that reflect what you eat? Let me know down in the comments below what proportion of what you eat do you think comes from whole food sources? Also, if you liked this video and you learned something today, hit that thumbs up button. And if you want to make sure that you get the additional content where we go into the 4 pillars of the low inflammation diet, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell, make sure that you get notified when I upload more content. I'll also place a link to the blog down below where you can read this and other information about healthy eating, or sign up for our email newsletter so that you can stay up to date and always learn more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.